Okay, so let's dive right into this really powerful 1967 book, Black Power by Stokely Carmichael and Charles V. Hamilton. Now, this is the book that introduced that famous phrase into, well, the whole world's vocabulary. But what did it actually mean back then? We're going to unpack the original ideas straight from the source. Right from the jump, the authors hit you with this incredible quote from Frederick Douglass. And it's perfect because it sets the stage for their entire argument. They're telling you, look, this isn't about appealing to people's good side. This is about the raw, fundamental nature of power itself. And what they're building here isn't a simple handbook with a checklist of things to do. They're really, really clear about that. The book is meant to be a political framework, a whole new way of looking at the world, so that Black people can get themselves together and, take control of their own lives. So, to really get what they're saying, you have to understand their diagnosis of the problem. And it all starts with this very provocative and, for a lot of people at the time, a pretty shocking analogy for what was going on between Black and white America. First things first, they give a very specific, almost clinical definition of racism. And you'll notice it's not just about prejudice or somebody's bad attitude. For these authors, racism is a system. It's about decisions, it's about policies, and it all boils down to one thing: subordination and control. Now, this slide right here is so important because it gets at a critical distinction they make. On one hand, you've got individual racism, something like bombing a church. It's a clear, overt act of hatred, and pretty much everyone agrees it's wrong. But then you have institutional racism. This is when hundreds of Black babies in that very same city die because they don't have proper food or housing or medical care. You see the difference? One is loud and obvious. The other is the quiet, devastating result of how the system itself is built. And this is the core of their argument. They say that institutional racism works exactly like colonialism. Black communities inside the United States, they argue, are basically internal colonies. They are controlled from the outside, politically, economically, and socially, by the dominant white society. And they say this colonial relationship isn't just some abstract theory. No, it's very real, and it operates through three concrete pillars that shape everyday life. So how is this control maintained? They say it happens in three key areas: the political, the economic, and the social. Let's break each one down. Okay, so politically, the authors talk about a system of indirect rule. What does that mean? It means the big decisions that affect the Black community are made by outsiders, and they're often carried out through local Black leaders who, at the end of the day, are more loyal to the downtown political machine than they are to the people they're supposed to be representing. Now this number, $246,000. This just brilliantly illustrates the economic pillar. The book points to this absolutely stunning statistic from back then. This was the expected lifetime earnings for a Black man with 5 or more years of college. The shocking part? It was less than what a white man could expect to earn with only a high school diploma. Just let that sink in. And then there's the social aspect, which they argue is maybe the most vicious of all. It's the psychological impact. It's a system that is constantly sending messages of inferiority, which leads to what the book calls a pernicious self and group hatred. Basically, the oppressed start to believe the negative image that the oppressor has created for them. Okay, so if that's the problem, a colonial system that's designed to break you down, then what's the solution? Well, the very first step in their framework is all about a radical redefinition of identity. The authors pull out this fantastic quote from Through the Looking Glass. And you might think, Humpty Dumpty, what's that about? But it makes a profound point. Power isn't just about physical force. It's about who gets to define reality, who gets to decide what words mean, who defines what's good and what's bad. So, the very first crucial step is to take back that power of definition. It means you have to totally reject the image that the oppressor has created for you, all those stereotypes you see on the left, and instead forge a brand new, self-created image, an image of strength rooted in your own history and your own culture. Which brings us right to it. We've seen the diagnosis. It's colonialism. We've seen the first step of the cure, redefining your own identity. So now we get to the big one. What did the authors actually mean by the phrase Black Power? Here's the core idea: solidarity. The authors argue that before any group can really operate from a position of strength and bargain effectively with the rest of society, it first has to come together. It has to unite and build its own internal strength. It has to, as they say, close ranks. So what does that look like in practice? Well, it's a three-part call to action. First, unite around that shared identity. Second, use that unity to build a real, tangible sense of community. And finally, and this is so crucial, create and lead your own organizations to fight for your own goals. Of course, this idea of closing ranks, of organizing exclusively as a group, it immediately raised a big question, a criticism that the authors knew they had to tackle head on. And their answer was a loud and clear no. They drew a very sharp line in the sand. Racism, they said, is a system of subjugation. Its goal is to keep a group down. Black power, in their definition, has the exact opposite goal, to lift a community up so it can achieve full and effective participation in society. And this same logic led them to be pretty critical of the main goal of the civil rights movement at the time, which was integration. They basically argued that integration, as it was being practiced, was a one-way street. It sent the message that for Black people to get a good education or live in a nice house, they had to be absorbed into white institutions, which just reinforces the idea that white is the standard of what's good. So the ultimate goal for them wasn't about being absorbed into the mainstream or just assimilating into a system they saw as deeply flawed. Instead, it was about building and strengthening the Black community, preserving its own unique culture, and then, from that new position of strength, challenging the wider system to demand an equal share of power. Which leaves us with this final, powerful thought, right from the heart of the book. The authors argue that the most fundamental right an oppressor takes away from a people is the right to define themselves. And that poses a pretty deep question for all of us, doesn't it? What does it truly mean to reclaim that power?